Okay, it's now 8:27. I'm calling the business portion of the meeting back to order. Executive session was completed. There's no action to report. And we will start our business meeting with our pledge. And I'll ask Ms. Johnson to please lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you remain standing for just a minute to have a moment of silence for Deborah Jones, who passed away after battling a serious illness. She retired in August of last year from South Country after 32 years of service as a teaching assistant. Most of her time was spent with our pre-K program. And she's also the former president of Bellport Teachers Association affiliate, BTAA. Services are scheduled for this Sunday and will be shared with all district staff. So take this moment of silence to remember Deb and to appreciate her service. Thank you. Be seated. Emergency exit locations. Make a note of where they are, so in the event of an emergency, you can leave in an orderly fashion through these exits. This is a smoke-free school district. Smoking is not permitted in the building or anywhere on school grounds. It's also a hate-free school district and a bully-free school district. So, I think we're going to board consent agenda, but do I need to refresh this?
Yes, you do need.
I do need to refresh to get that. Bear with me for just a second. Okay, we have.
So with your refresh, I would just let you know that now item 3 needs to wait until after item discussion 2. So you would be acting on C1, C2, and C4.
Okay, is there a motion? Let me find the language for this. We're going to do C4 separately because there's it's a separate resolution. But we'll do items C1 and C2, minutes of our March 1 and March 2 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those? Ms. Felice, second by Mr. Trent. All in favor? It's unanimous by the 4 members present. And then we go to item C4. Do you want to read it or do you want me to? To resolve, the board hereby denies the appeal
Of the suspension imposed by the superintendent of schools described in confidential Schedule A, submitted by the parent of student listed in confidential Schedule B on or about February 8th, 2022, and authorize the board president to issue a decision letter to the parents on behalf of the Board of Education.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the resolution? Ms. Felice, a second. Mr. Parker, all in favor? The four members voted, so the resolution passes. And then we're going to hold number 3 until later, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now we're up to superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you. As of today, we have 862 known positive COVID-19 cases that have been reported to the district. Of these 862, it includes 245 active staff members and 617 students. I think we've had one COVID report in the last 2 weeks, so we are doing very well in this area. Also, as of today, the current count of faculty and staff in quarantine, both students and faculty and staff, is 0. And that has also been a number that we've been holding for about 2 weeks now. I'm happy to report our transition to mask optional has been going well. We are also transitioning to pre-COVID normalcy in other areas. Small group instruction within our classrooms will return. Alternate row eating for breakfast and lunch has ended. And by Monday, all of our schools will transition back to full use of the cafeteria for lunch service. Breakfast for elementary schools will continue in the classroom, and that's simply because we can't fit everybody in the cafeteria at one time at the elementary level. We are also planning to transition back to our end-of-year in-person activities, such as our moving ups, picnics, dances, and graduation, so I'm happy to report that. And I'm also happy to report that both students and faculty and staff appear to be doing well and happy to be mask-free. On Wednesday, March 23rd, from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., we will be holding our second meet and greet at our Family Engagement Center. Families are encouraged to stop in and see what the center has to offer, and we continue to look for ways to improve the center and support our families. So we'd love to hear from you, so please stop by. A flyer will be going out shortly. It may have gone out today, actually. And that is all the announcements I have, President Hayes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have one question of the superintendent. I noticed on social media today that Dr. Gianni and Ms. Costa will take questions about the school budget at the Hegeman Fire Department. And now I don't see the
Oh, I
date for
think
the
that's
cutoff.
April 11th.
April 11th?
Till April 11th, yeah, Jackie reached out to us, we did schedule it, I was planning to report that to the board in the update tomorrow. And obviously, I know that Jackie had reached out to some board members individually, y'all are welcome to come. I don't want to, I don't know what you saw on social media.
It was on social media, but it didn't indicate that it was from Miramar, just that it would be at Hegeman.
Yes, it's Miramar, and I believe it's 7 p.m. also.
All right, you'll confirm that in tomorrow's update?
Yes.
And then we'll get that on the website as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just a little side comment on that, it's nice to be able to get back to some of the activities that happened this time of year, back before the pandemic came in, because I do know that I remember as a member of the community going to some of the, we called them road shows, because administration traveled around to speak to different groups. So,
I don't mean to cut you off,
yeah,
but I am, obviously.
Well,
And
go
I-
ahead.
And I apologize, but
That's
you
all right.
used that word roadshows, because I met with PTA Council on Monday.
Mhm.
And they had requested if the board might consider doing the roadshow the night of the budget hearing at the middle school. I thought it was a good idea, because the hearing is generally a light meeting, and we can do the hearing, we can publicize, we get everybody in that auditorium, and then we can make the presentation.
Oh, good. Good, so you
So
didn't
I'm
interrupt.
glad you said roadshow.
Yeah, how about that?
That's the April
The
13th.
Anybody know the?
budget hearing,
It's April 4th, May
May
4th?
May 4th?
yeah, May 4th.
And that's the time we generally do the roadshows. You know, we could stream it as well. And this way the whole board will actually be there for the roadshow. I think it'd be pretty good. Is that something the board would like me to
Yeah, I
confirm with
think you
PTA
definitely
Council?
should,
Favorable.
yeah, absolutely. So, the next section, any trustee or advisory committee reports?
I have one.
One?
Thank you. Since our last meeting, I've enjoyed and had the distinct honor and pleasure of participating in the superintendent's search efforts with the rest of the Board of Education, interviewing the prospective candidates, and I look forward to the continued process. On Friday, March 11th, I enjoyed an inspirational morning with the Bellport Middle School 7th grade students from Mr. Green's Social Studies classes, period 5 and 8. Interviewer Ash Porter and teammates Gabrielle Waller, Mitchell Huff, Ashlyn Faith Sky, and Jinx Barrett and Desire Johnson spoke passionately about mental health awareness. Their questions were thought-provoking and heartwarming. These students have learned how to use their voice to help other fellow classmates. All because these students experienced the benefit of the Buddy Bench located at their elementary schools. They became acutely aware of the need to do more for those students struggling to fit in and help them feel like they belong. They are looking forward to having an after-school program so students can just gather and talk. Last week being Social Worker Awareness Week 2, I'm hopeful their suggestions will be met favorably. The eighth period class, led by Andiva Lawrence, Jack Fauci, and Ashley Dondero, dove into the delicate situation and heartaches of racism personally experienced. We spoke of how even the most innocent of words and gestures may be felt as hurtful by others. Each student pressed that it was up to all of us to participate in the understanding and education of how we can become a more inclusive society. I thank them for the invitation, and I look forward to more of the same. The remainder of my weekend was spent on reviewing the very important budget presentations we are about to hear again tonight. Thank you.
Okay. And I could tell you, I attended a refit meeting on Friday morning, which dealt with New York State funding of schools and the changes that are needed in Albany in order to have fair funding for schools. And I'm just going to leave it at that for now. So I think if there are no other comments,
I have that on my,
yes,
I have my report.
you're ready?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, is it under this? I'm under this one, right?
Yep.
Yep.
she is.
You're there. You're the,
We usually have her
down
go
here,
first. that's
trustee
why.
and
Trustee.
advisory committee report.
Last Wednesday, I attended the opiate awareness workshop and Narcan training hosted by Bellport High School in conjunction with Compass Unity. The Suffolk County Police EMT unit conducted an amazing event informing students, teachers, and our South Country community on the dangers of drug use and how to administer Narcan. This month, the Student Council Executive Board met with Mrs. De La Rosa to talk about school climate issues that students were talking about and our upcoming activities, events, and community service project that we would like to organize. It was our first meeting back in the normal climate, so it was good to talk about bringing different activities back. We hope to meet regularly to keep lines of communication open. March is Spirit Month. To kick it off, we had anything but a backpack day. It was a big success and people were very creative. On Pajama Day, a huge number of people wore pajamas. People are really into the school spirit and are in good spirits of getting things back to normal. Tomorrow we will celebrate St. Patrick's Day and everyone will wear green. With the Key Club and help of Bellport High School, we collected over 100 coats plus hats, scarves, and gloves, and other cold weather gear to donate. Continuing the ideas of Spirit Month, we will have powder puff football, and the boys will coach. Teams will be first grade on Tuesday, March 29th on the turf field. Teams had to sign up ahead of time, and this fundraiser will be for the Student Council Scholarship Fund. We will also be collecting gently used dresses and suits for students who can't afford them for prom or cotillion. We are leading humanitarian aid efforts for Ukraine. We're working with the Life Skills students and National Honor Society to make and sell ribbons and also collect needed medical, baby, and non-perishable supplies. Other clubs will combine with us over the next few weeks to collect outside local supermarkets and drugstores. to collect goods or donations. The money will be sent to the American Red Cross and will bring the collection of items to St. John's Ukrainian Catholic Church in Riverhead. We are asking people to wear blue and yellow on Friday, and we'll take a family photo at the end of the day. The 23rd is National Giving Day, so we'll try to do something then also. It's been a really positive response, and Mrs. De La Rosa, Mr. Favell, and Mrs. O.R. were great about helping us get started and get the word out. The ribbons and donation boxes will be placed in the main lobby so the community can drop off or get ribbons and donate to the high school.
May I make a comment to Ms. Johnson's report? I was so happy to receive the email from administration today about your efforts to raise money for Ukraine. I thought it was so timely, especially after hearing President Zelensky speak to Congress this morning. So I really want to applaud the work that you're doing, you and the students are doing.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll second what you just said. Next, we're going to the public commentary section. We have 2 commenters. I have, the first is Karam Odekan.
Hi,
Hi,
Karim.
Karim, I'm so
Yeah, no
sorry.
worries. So I just have 2 questions. The first one is, in December, I had contacted Dr. Gianni and the board about the town of Brookhaven's IDA exemptions for the Winter Brothers North Point warehouse tax exemption, which will cost our district over $20 million in the next 15 years in foregone tax revenue. Dr. Gianni's letter to the IDA is posted on the IDA website and didn't mention the cost to our district of this exemption. And my FOIL of the district showed that there was no communication or analysis from the Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Ms. Christine Costa, and Dr. Gianni with respect to the cost of this tax exemption to the district. So my question was, were folks aware that this exemption would cost our district $20 million in foregone revenue over the next 15 years? Why was this not discussed with the Assistant Superintendent for Finance? As an affected tax jurisdiction, why wasn't this cost raised in the comments to the IDA? Other Long Island districts like Syosset have been very vocal in IDAs granting these exemptions, but ours was quite silent. Only weeks later, we learned of our district's surprise structural budget deficit. So I feel like these 2 issues are very connected. The second question I had was, I'm trying to follow this structural budget deficit, and it's very difficult to follow for me, and I have a master's in economics. My question is, when was the Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Ms. Christine Costa, first aware of the mismatch between bond terms and state aid, and how was she made aware? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Our protocol is to have 3 minutes, awarded to the speakers so that we listen. And I think as people listen to the budget presentation, some of your questions will be answered that way. Our next speaker, Tony Hoffine.
Hi, I'm sure you all read the article in the advanced scathing article about the district and the issues, the financial issues that we're under. Greg Miglino makes the point that there's no way this should have happened, and he cites information that he had where he has on hand how it shouldn't have happened, because he cites all of the loans, et cetera, et cetera. So what he, and I don't usually agree with Greg Miglino, but he says there should be an audit. And do you plan to have an audit? Because it in the face of $4 to $5 million missing or not accountable for, there should be an audit. Who's responsible for that? So that's a question. Can anybody answer that for me? Is there going to be a forensic audit?
This is an opportunity for you to speak to us for 3 minutes, and questions like this will be answered as appropriate.
I can give a quick answer
Okay.
to that. First is no misappropriation, and second, the comptroller's office did reach out to us and indicated there was no findings for any type of audit of the district.
But just follow the numbers, okay? Follow the numbers, and there was a point where somebody dropped the ball. Who dropped the ball? So
But the money's not missing. That's the point that the
it's not
superintendent is
missing,
saying.
but it was missing for a while, and then never really, the public wasn't aware of the fact that it was missing. So who do you hold responsible for that? You know, somebody's responsible, and certainly the public shouldn't have to bear the burden of the taxes. That's my point.
Okay, I think that as you sit through the rest of the budget presentation, you will see that the facts are there's no money missing here.
Okay.
And so some of your comments are addressed to facts that don't exist. So I hope you will stay for the rest of the
I'm
presentation.
afraid I can't,
And-
but, yeah, I'm afraid I
Okay.
can't.
Thank
but-
you.
But you know, it's a matter of words you're using, the money is missing. I think the money was missing or not accounted for going back 4 or 5 years ago. And it should have been, and I think it sounds very suspicious, like although people saw, whomever was in charge, saw that was not, that money was, they were in trouble, and they just pushed it on for 4 or 5 years. So you want to play with words and say the money isn't missing, fine. But I still think it needs to have some kind of an audit. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And now, we're up to the budget presentation.
There's one more.
One more? Another?
I have an email.
Oh, you
Oh,
gotta read
that's
the.
right. And so you're gonna read the email for us.
Yeah.
This email is from Sarah Colon. Hello, Dr. Gianni and our Board of Trustees. This email is in regards to the board budget presentation, particularly this section on curriculum and instruction and the proposed cut to the remote learning program. No one on this board will question my advocacy for remote learning, and this email will be no exception. First off, the remote learning program has been a godsend for families who have various situations that legitimately warranted a remote learning option. Again, the reasons need not be explained in this email, as the district is well aware of each student's individual need. While I understand the district's optimism for a complete return to normalcy for the upcoming school year, we must face the reality that come the fall, the need for a remote option may still be necessary for students that have legitimate reasons for remaining on remote learning. I must note that each student's progress or challenges should be evaluated before this program is considered to be cut. If it is failing across the board, then something is wrong. However, if we are seeing success, why would this program be the first thing the district wants to cut to try to save money? The remote learning program is a successful and equitable option for students. Fast forward to the budget presentation. I knew that it would be presented to cut the remote program immediately as a not needed expenditure. However, let's look at the facts of the remote program and its cost and what this means for the upcoming budget. 1, the remote program was moved from in-district teachers to a BOCES program based solely on the fact that it would save the district money. 2, after paying the remote BOCES program up front, the district would then receive money back in aid on each student that they paid out for, just as they receive aid for any student that participates in technical BOCES and special education BOCES programs. This aid return was how the district was able to sell this part of the budget last year, because it would not be paying the full amount on these students. 3, therefore, the current $650,000 expenditure that is stated in the budget presentation is not the actual cost of what the district has paid out, and this should have been clearly stated by our financial advisors that the district does receive aid money back on each student, hence not a $650,000 expenditure. Now, what does this mean going forward for the district and their budget? We are not closing the gap by any means by cutting what has been a vital program to the students it has serviced. We are essentially only saving a portioned amount that the district actually pays out of pocket following the return of aid for BOCES. Why should we keep the remote program through BOCES? Because receive aid on every student that participates in any BOCES program, which includes the remote BOCES students. I am all for the other BOCES programs our students attend as vitally needed programs and another form of equitable education. The remote students should be given the same equitable option to learn in an environment best suited for their needs. It is the same as any other BOCES program we have, just a different area of study. Do you want me to continue? My time is up.
What time is that?
Should I?
How much more do you have?
A few more paragraphs.
Can you get through it really quick?
If we are not even considering cutting any other BOCES programs as a form of saving the district, why would cutting the remote BOCES program be the only one that is actually going to save the district money? The students that have benefited from this equitable form of learning will still have legitimate reasons for the need of the program. If we cut the remote program, the families that still have these situations will now have the right to fight for home instruction services given to them directly by district to ensure their health and safety. This will end up costing the district more money, as home instruction services is far more costly per student than the BOCES program costs. This remote program has benefited students with severe health issues, giving them a real school environment and a class community when before they would be alone on home instruction with just a tutor for a small amount of hours. We also cannot deny that there were students that struggled with in-person instruction long before the pandemic that are flourishing in the remote environment. We're in a much different time, and this equitable educational program should be offered for students that truly need it. I would also like to note that other districts will be offering remote learning through BOCES for individual students with legitimate reasons as an alternative to in-person school for next year. I'm asking the board to ask these questions of our financial advisors and our district. If we take the remote learning program away, how much money are we really saving the district after the aid is returned? And if we do not offer this program, how much will it cost our district if those families fight for home instruction services should they need it? Is it worth cutting this equitable form of education for this group of students? I think cutting this one BOCES program will be a disservice to this community when we're trying to stand out as an equitable district. It is also giving false information to the wider community. I think this one program was causing such a strain on the budget when in actuality it is minor in comparison to what we are really dealing with financially in this district. Please keep the remote learning BOCES program. I thank you all for reading my email and look forward to continuing to work with you on the South Country Strong community. Best regards, Sarah Colon.
Thank you. And that takes us now up to the budget presentation and staffing. And I think, Dr. Gianni, you...
Yes, I think I'm going to kick that off and then pass it off to Ms. Costa as we get into the finance piece. So when we look at staffing, we look at it in terms of four broad areas of functional activity: administrative, elementary, secondary, and non-instructional staff. Okay, in terms of administrative staff, that looks like central office administrators like myself, assistant supes, the building level administrators, or principals and assistant principals, and district-wide are directors. So in the area of administrative staffing, we are projecting a 2.0 overall decrease. Those positions are specifically the Director of Elementary Education. You might note that we don't have a Director of Elementary Education currently, and that is because we never filled that position. That position does remain in the budget, and the cut is, one of the two cuts is that position. The second position is the Instructional Data Administrator. For the person who's at the district office currently, supports directors and building level administration with the compiling of instructional data to support student needs, as well as other activities. Okay, in terms of elementary staffing projections, we look at March enrollments to make these projections. Our guideline is 25 students per class in grades K through 5. And then we split those classes when all sections are at 26. Enrollment projections in grade level sections are reviewed throughout the school year. Obviously, it's March, things will change. We look at them throughout the school year as well as into summer months. So the projections that you may see on the screen today may not necessarily fall right into the exact places as we hit the road when it comes September. So I'm going to talk about what this table looks like first, because I don't remember how we did this last year. We're going to go through each of our elementary schools. This is South Haven Early Childhood Center. So when you take a look at the top portion of the table, you will see what is currently happening at South Haven. You'll see the enrollment, the number of sections, and what the average class size is. And you'll see that in terms of projections for the next school year, we're projecting the same in terms of what we're expecting for students to be entering in that program. So there's no change in South Haven Early Childhood Center.
I have a question there.
Sure. Go back.
Is this gonna go out for an RFP like you've done in prior years?
So we're happy with the YMCA and the way the RFP was initially written. We can extend that, so our plans is to extend that for next school year. Did I say that correctly?
We have extended it.
We have extended.
Sorry, what was that answer? I didn't hear that.
We have extended the RFP.
So you've already extended
Yes.
it? Okay, could you tell us when that happened?
2 weeks ago?
Okay, moving on to our elementary schools, it looks a little different, and that's because particularly at Brookhaven, we have a language program. So again, same concept. At the top, you'll see what's currently occurring, the grade levels, the enrollment, the general education sections, the dual language sections, and then you'll see a column for integrated sections. Those are our integrated co-teaching sections in the district. So when you total them all the way down or across, that's the number of sections per grade level or gen ed bilingual or integrated. And for example, so looking at kindergarten, so you'll see 2 gen ed, 2 bilingual, and 2 integrated. So there's a total of 6 sections at that grade level currently. So we're projecting no change overall at Brookhaven next school year. And I don't think you see any change within the grade level either.
Just before you move off this one, this is
Sure.
one of the slides that had to be updated before tonight's presentation. So I only see, so I see we had 23 total sections in the first presentation, but 24 now. So why did the numbers, why didn't we have the?
It was a typo.
It was a typo?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
So if I would've done the math, it
changes were
would've been-
typo, the 2 changes were typo.
okay.
There's no change.
There's no change, it was just a
Yeah,
typo?
substantively, there's no change.
Okay.
Moving on to Kramer Street, again, you'll see the same table appears. No bilingual sections at Kramer, that's why you see zeros in that column. Also, no integrated sections at Kramer as well. Kramer has some of our special classes along with the gen ed, which will be noted on another slide. But also speaking along those lines, the average class size, you'll see that average class sizes at Kramer range from 20 to 23. No change overall for Kramer. At Burn Crits, this is the one building that you will see a reduction of 1.0, and that is notably due to the low class sizes that we have currently in our kindergarten at 17 and 18 for grade level. So we're projecting 1 less class from 4 to 3 at first grade next school year. This is probably a good time to mention that while we are projecting at a specific grade level here, our principals have the ability and the authority to move those around based on changes in enrollment. So right now, that's what it looks like. But you know what? Come September, there may be more kids in the 3rd grade than we thought and less kids in the 1st grade.
And does this mean a
so-
teacher may be accessed, or do we have
No,
anticipated
no one
retirements?
will be accessed due to enrollment. Once the budget's in place, there will be no more accessing. There may be additions, and you'll see later in the presentation, we have contingent positions in place for an increase in staffing that you might not have been able to project. So for example, if the 1st grade goes above that 17, 18 that we're projecting, there's a position in the budget to allow for us to hire a teacher. Frank P. Long, no changes here overall. The one thing that you will see a change, now remember, Frank P. Long accepts our dual language program as well. This is the first year, if you look at the bilingual column, you'll see that in fourth grade next school year, we're projecting 2. So this is the first year that our side-by-sides are going up from Brookhaven Elementary School. So there's a need of 2 there, but you'll also see a reduction in the general sections by 1. So we're not increasing the number of teachers, the kids are just moving into different programs, whether it's gen ed or bilingual.
So this one wasn't a typo? This one was just the numbers had changed?
I don't recall which exactly was changed on it, Ms.
The
Felice.
fifth grade enrollment was
Yeah, it was probably.
stated at 276 and now it's, I'm sorry, 242 and now it's stated at 276.
It was probably an error that was corrected.
Okay.
So when we look at our elementary teacher summary, these are the classroom teachers. This is a slide that just basically goes through everything we just talked about. South Haven, there's no change. Brookhaven, there's no change. Kramer, there is no change. There is a reduction of 1.0 from Byrne Fritz, and there is no change at Frank P. Long, for an overall reduction of 1.0 in full-time equivalent positions. So I mentioned the integrated co-teaching classes. This is a summary of those classes. You'll see that we have the integrated co-teaching program, both at Brookhaven and Frank P. Though that support and number of teachers is not changing district-wide. In addition to integrated co-teaching, we have special classes. I mentioned that when we talked about the Kramer slide. Special classes, depending upon student needs, are appear throughout the district. So you'll see that at Brookhaven currently we have 1 special class, and we are projecting an additional special class at Brookhaven for next school year. All the other classes at the other buildings are staying the same in terms of the number of classrooms. So we have an overall increase of 1.0 staffing in the area of special class programs. In addition to gen ed, integrated and special class programs, we have resource program support and resource teachers to provide that support. Those are really pieces. They're generally teachers that are within the building already that are also providing resource support. As you can see, you see 0.4s, 0.4, 0.4, and 0.8. Those support numbers are not changing next school year. So in addition to gen ed and special education teachers and support, we have other areas of teacher projections in the area of art, E&L, health and physical education, and all those that are obviously listed here. I will not go through all of them, but I will speak to 2 items. You'll see a reduction of math, 4.0, and you'll see a reduction of remote teacher, 1.0. The remote teacher, as you know, and from an earlier presentation, administration is recommending removing that program. We currently have a special education teacher assigned to that program at the elementary level because BOCES did not provide that support. So that is that 1.0 teacher. In terms of the math, currently the data suggests that there's been no improvement in math and full performance. And what we've been doing is pulling kids out, tier 2 and tier 3 kids out of classrooms. And there's no data that suggests there's improvement. We believe that's because we're taking kids out of core instruction. So we are now going to provide support first to tier 3 teachers, students, and then other students if the availability is there. Every building will have a math specialist. So in the area of other elementary staffing, we have a 5.0 decrease overall.
Can you just speak to the excess question? Will teachers be excess because
So I was
of
going
this
to do that at the end,
Okay.
but I'll do it now. I think you'll see at the end of the slides that 19.6 full-time equivalent positions are being reduced. 17.8 of the 19.6 reductions are through attrition. Okay? Only 1.8 of the 19.6 is actual people, and that 1.8 is spread over 5 individuals. So nobody's losing a job, but some folks are going to contractual and not having a full job.
Dr. Gianni, can you just say those numbers to me one more time?
Sure. 19.6 full-time equivalent positions. 17.8 of those positions are through attrition, meaning no one lost the job. And 1.8 of those positions are spread over 5 individuals. And that spread ranges from 0.2 to 1.8.
You can explain that at a later slide.
Sure.
Okay.
I won't have a slide for that. I'm going to have to come back to it.
Okay.
Okay, so any questions on elementary? Because I'm going to move into the secondary now. Okay, so similar to elementary, secondary projections are also based on March course enrollments. And again, we continue to review those, particularly with schedule changes at the secondary level. Things do move, so it is fluid during the school year. But what you're going to see, we believe we will be projecting accurately within the full-time equivalent position total. So at Belfort Middle School, you'll notice that we have an 84 youngster decline in enrollment. That decline is the result of many of the reductions that you're going to see in a minute when we get into those certification areas. At the high school, only 4. Still a decline in enrollment, but it's not hitting the high school like it is the middle school for next school year at least. Okay, so when we look at secondary staffing projections, we obviously look at it by subject. So what you see here is the subject on the left. And the way we display it for the board is to see the changes at the middle school, the changes at the high school, and then the overall change in that last column. So you'll see at the 6th grade, there's a 1.0 reduction. That is really as a result of the loss in enrollment. I believe there's 11 youngsters less projected for next school year. English, no change, except for, at the high school, there is a reduction of 0.8, probably also due to enrollment. Math, 0.2. Science is 0.8 at the middle school. And again, as I mentioned, these larger reductions are a result of the reduced enrollment at the secondary schools, particularly the middle school. Reading, 1.0 at the middle school. And then we have a +1 in ENL at the high school. We continue to get more students that require ENL services, and we continue, of course, to provide for those services. Moving on to some additional subjects, you'll see pieces here in terms of reductions. We have a full 1.0 reduction in special education, and this is, of course, as a result of student placement. You'll see a reduction in the social worker of 1.0. Again, with the declining enrollment, we believe we will be able to continue to support the needs of our students even with that reduction. And then we have a 0.2 increase for a new column or line called restorative justice. I know the board is aware that we have begun the program a couple of years ago, really started implementing this school year. We found that it will be more effective if we give some folks some release time to do the follow-up work and the meeting with students and parents with regard to the program. So we're projecting a 0.2. Actually, the 0.2 was a request from the high school. We spread it out over both buildings because we'd like, obviously, to see it in both buildings. In addition to Frank P. Long, and as we move down the road, we may see a need further down at the lower levels. And overall, you'll see a 4.1 decrease at the middle school and a 3.5 decrease at the high school, and overall secondary of a 7.6 decrease. So, when you take a look at this in summary, actually what I just said, we have a 7.8 decrease of full-time equivalent positions at the secondary overall. So in addition to our instructional staff, we have non-instructional staff. Let me first add that this slide probably should be renamed. Our teaching assistants are instructional people. So let me say that for the board and for those listening at home, that TAs are instructional folks. We are anticipating an increase of 1 person in the teacher assistant line. And then we are anticipating a reduction of 1 in custodian. We believe we can absorb that position through national cleaning standards and what our folks are doing. And then responders, you'll see that as a big number, 5.0 reduction. So I know the board is aware that hiring has been difficult this year for us and for all districts across Long Island. We were unable to fill all of our vacancies in a number of areas. Responders are one of them. So we've been 5 down all school year. As a result, our buildings repurposed, realigned, and reassigned, and it's been working well. So because of that, I see no need to add positions that we don't need. That's why you see a 5.0 decrease in responders. So to summarize, all of the tables that we just went through, administrative, you see a 2.0 reduction, elementary a 5.0, secondary 7.6, non-instructional 5.0, all totaling 19.6. Again, I'll add that this budget or this proposal includes financial support for 3.0 full-time equivalent positions. That is there simply because these are projections, things change, and we may need to make those changes somewhere along the line. And just to review again what I did earlier, 19.6 full-time equivalent reductions, including the 3 contingent positions. 17.8 of that is reduction through attrition, no people losing jobs. 1.8 of the 19.6 is spread over 5 individuals. These individuals will simply have less than a full-time position. And also 4 of the 5 of those folks will still maintain benefits because the reduction is that low. And this results in no cuts in propane. And that is all I have. Unless we have some questions regarding staffing, I'm going to turn it over to Mr.
I have
Extract.
a question. Sure. A couple questions. So when it comes to your responders, what will that look like, right? With now 20 security guards for the district?
Well, it would look like what it looks like right now. I can't tell you how many are in which building, but they're mostly at the secondary. We maintained our 2 responders at each elementary school because we believe that work is working very well, particularly since we're trying to have a male and a female, and they are responding to student and staff needs. The reductions were mostly in
Three at the high school, 2 at the middle school.
Okay,
That's
so
where we're
those 5
short.
are 3 at the high school, 2 at the middle school.
So we have, what are the totals now? We have 2 in the elementary
How
school.
many high school?
We would have 30, we're down 5, so there's 25. So we're 10 at the high school, we're 7 at the middle school, we have at the K-3s 2, and we have 3 at Frank P. Lawn.
Now, what would it look like when we reduce the staff by 5?
No, that's what it is.
That's what it is now.
That's what it is.
Okay.
You'd have to put 2 and 3 at those buildings.
So it's actually a reduction in money as opposed to a reduction in the staff that we have right now.
Correct, because we couldn't fill the positions.
So there's 2 in the elementary, 3 in Frank P. Lawn. How many in the middle school?
Middle school 7,
High school is,
high school's 10 right now, but it should be 9 and 13. And we didn't fill the positions.
but it should be 9 in the middle school,
Correct.
and it should be 13 in the high school.
Correct. So no one's losing their job, we're just gonna take that money out of the budget because we didn't fill the positions and it's working well as is. If there is additional people needed for an event or something like that, we have a list of substitutes that can be called in.
So has there been any assessment, like a security assessment or any kind of, consulting with anyone who's like a security guard or certified to?
Just building administration who says that they're supporting what's needs in the building.
So you said it's been working. What does that mean? Like, how do you determine if, 10 is okay and not 13?
We are able to support student needs. We are able to address incidents, and we'll be able to support administration and what's going on in the building.
I guess my question
there's no
is,
increase in, I'm not sure what the question is.
I guess my question is, where does these numbers come from? Like, how do you say, I think, I recommend 13 security guards in a high school opposed to any other number. What makes 13 needed or recommended other than 10 is my question.
Coverage of the classes, student behavior, I think a lot has to do with it, how kids are behaving well. Whether it's a result of response to intervention or simply, other avenues that is happening in the school, there is not a need for so much supervision at those buildings.
And the social worker, is it that we're looking to cut?
Yes.
How is that justified?
Well, I think a declining enrollment also, that has a lot to do with it. As I mentioned, we have 84 at the middle school, another 4 at the high school. And enrollment has been declining over the years. We've never looked at those positions, but simply because there is an attrition situation here, it gives us a good cause to take a good look at it. And we believe we can continue to support students' needs based on what we have. More than likely, one might be split between two buildings, but that's something that we'll have to assess down the road.
So in the how do we address in the future recruiting and retaining for the positions that we're having trouble with now? How do we do that in the future?
Well, I think there's a number of issues. I think I think it's difficult all across the board in terms of recruiting anyone. We're not having any problem with professional staff. It's generally our substitutes and our support staff that we have issues with. I mean, the board is interested in increasing salaries. I mean, that may be something that might help, but I'm not too sure exactly what would be. Salaries would always help. I wouldn't say that we have the highest paid substitutes or the highest paid responders.
So I guess my point is I don't want cutting 5 security positions, which I believe is important and necessary, especially with what we know happened at the high school, to just save money. Because the cost reward aspect of it, $150,000 for 5 security guards, to me is definitely worth it. The problem, just because we're having an issue with filling the role doesn't mean that the role isn't needed, in my opinion.
Sure, and I could appreciate that, but it's not because we're having a problem filling it. It's simply having a problem filling it allowed us to reassess and readjust, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, perfect example of the incident that happened the other day at the high school. It was handled well. It wasn't a result of not enough responders.
The people whom we consult with about our code of conduct, what is that firm called?
I think you're referring to the appendices, the gang.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the company.
Would
Ken
they-
Bombase is the individual. I forget the name of his company.
Yeah.
What? Global Threat Assessment.
Would they be the people who you would turn to look at the security, needs of a building? Like, would they be the ones you would turn to who would give you a recommendation about how many security guards they recommend be in a particular building?
I don't think that's in their wheelhouse, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
They're doing trainings to support individuals such as responders, security administration.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they analyze staffing needs. I mean, that's something we could certainly look, but I don't know.
I would like to, because last year we reduced our security staff by 4, and now it's by 5. So going from 29 to 20 is a big change, and I want to make sure that somebody who's certified in this area would recommend it before I move forward with doing that. So I'm not sure how my colleagues feel, but reducing security by 9 in 2 years is quite a bit. So.
Well, I'm interested, though, in hearing that the reports from the buildings is that what we have now is working. And it sounds like some of the intervention programs that have been put into place in both the middle school and the high school are enabling that to happen. Did I hear that correctly?
No, I speculated that could be it, and I believe it to be true. There also, before Mr. Trent's time, We had a lot of gang, I don't want to say gang issues, but we had a lot of gang concerns years ago. And that was the time that we were increasing security. In fact, I remember a time that, I don't remember exactly how it went along, but we had concerns at the high school, and we made sure we had a responder at every corner, because we wanted a kid to feel safe in the building. So when they turned the corner, they always saw a responder, okay? That's not needed anymore. So that's part of the reason also why these reductions are warranted. But we could certainly reach out to Global Threat and see if they can look at staffing, if they do look at staffing issues.
Yeah, or someone, I
Sure.
appreciate that.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Belize?
Thank you. Computer lab assistants. We're recommending no change. We did have a change last year. I forget if it was 1 or 2 that we had a reduction in.
It was 2 or 3 or 4.
It was,
Two.
it was 2,
Two.
yeah. So we no longer have a computer lab assistant in every building. How are we maintaining the requests for lab assistants with the shortened staff?
I haven't heard any concerns for requests. I mean, I think I think you recall that one of the reasons we shifted was we moved away from the computer lab assistants that were less skillful in some of the areas that needed support in the buildings, and we moved to core where there were more skillful people. And we dispersed them throughout the district, so those type of sports were all throughout the district, and that's been working. I haven't heard any complaints or
Okay.
concerns about it.
Could you bring back to the board, maybe speak to the principals and see
Sure.
that it is working so that we're confident? I mean, because that was a big hit last year when we had to approve that change.
So feedback on
The amount of
assistant changes.
computer lab assistants
Sure.
and if it's working, and how it's working. I just want to speak to the typos. I mean, we're presenting $142 million, $145 million budget.
Mhm.
Our local paper is writing about our budget every single week. Can someone proof this document before it goes up on board docs?
People proof it, things get missed. I mean, yes, we do our due diligence. Many eyes looked at that. Occasionally, things do get missed.
Okay, occasionally. We had 3 that you just noted in your presentation, and in the next slide, there was a glaring one that obviously got changed before tonight, because I see it's changed on the document, but not on the one that I had printed out. So, and if a paper were, they print from our slides. If that were to go out with that typo, it would be quite embarrassing for the district. I just think we need to pay a little more attention to the documents we put out.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
That's it.
Any other trustee?
I do have one more question. The YMCA and the fact that the contract was renewed without the board's knowledge, could we be made aware of that as well? That the district exercised its option to extend the contract according to the agreement?
Sure. You want that? You'd like that in writing?
Well, we weren't aware of it until it was asked tonight.
Well,
So we could just be made aware of it at the time that these things occur.
but if my understanding is the RFP from last year had a renewal
Yes.
built into it.
Mhm.
So, it may be that we need to have a refresh,
Well, the board needs to be made aware that the district
Right.
exercised its option.
but.
Yeah, I was under the impression we were gonna have to vote for that again, but, I'm reminded that there was an extension. We should have been made aware.
I have another question. We're reducing 1 reading teacher,
Yes.
is that correct? How is that justified? Because my knowledge of how our students' reading levels are is not as high as they should be. How do we justify cutting a reading teacher when that is the case?
That's
And if
all-
I'm wrong, you can correct.
That's mostly due to the reduction of 84 students in middle school, and also currently reading classes are quite small.
Okay. So there's not too many students who need that extra help that.
No,
we
no,
can-
there's no change in the program at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll marry all the staffing changes. into an update for our budget and the numbers. So here we are after last meeting to this meeting. Our current proposed budget is $142,428,000. It's actually a $3 million reduction from our prior year budget, which is a little over 2%. And here's a summary of our budget changes. At our first meeting on February 16th, where we talked, after our tax cap meeting, this was the first disclosure of the budget and its expenditure side. We started at $145,091,000, and from there, after that meeting, we made $2.3 million in net reductions to our budget. And the last meeting that we met, that was $142.7 million was our expenditures in our budget. And between our meeting last 2 weeks ago and today, we have made another $357,000 in reductions to the budget for a current version of $142.4 million. That's our budget to date. If you look at the FTE counts, it actually equals what Dr. Gianni had just presented, the 16 point, help me out here, Dr. Gianni, 19.6. This includes 16.6 in FTE reductions because we have 3 contingencies in the budget, so the money is still in the budget.
Before you move off that slide, please.
Sure.
With respect to the remote option, it was reported to us at the last meeting it was going to be a $650,000 savings. Now it's reported as $722,000. I did send an email, and I believe the response was this amount now includes Social Security and contributions to, no? Okay,
No, at the
so why
last-
did it change, first
At the last
first
meeting, we
question?
spoke about the $650,000 was the BOCES cost, and from the last meeting to this meeting, in evaluating staffing, we realized that there's a remote teacher that's hired, and that now includes the remote teacher plus the BOCES option.
All right, so the answer I was given wasn't correct.
Well, but isn't that teacher the one you referred to, which was this special ed support
That's
that
correct.
Yes.
BOCES doesn't
That's correct.
provide?
May I continue? Thank you. Second question, with respect to the question that was raised earlier, how much of this is reimbursable by state aid on the remote option, and how much are we really saving?
I can tell you generally, BOCES cost, there's eligible and ineligible BOCES costs. As a district as a whole, we received 44% overall on all of our BOCES costs reimbursement, and that's after they adjust for the ineligible costs. So our overall program, this program, while it's not reconciled yet from BOCES, that happens after the year end, and they send everything up to the state, and there's a whole process on what costs become eligible, and ineligible. But probably the programs that resemble it in nature are the CTE program and maybe the alternative high school program. Both of those have a net BOCES reimbursement of 43 and 44%. So and our overall for the whole district is 44%. So it's probably in that range
Okay.
when the year ends.
So when salaries were spoken about in earlier presentations, those salaries were presented as what the district would be responsible for, not what we get aid for. So I would ask the same thing in these figures, that we report it the same way. The true figure, I'm going to use maybe some of the words that you used last time, versus the actual. The overall savings and then the actual when you apply state aid. It was done that way on salaries, which I didn't feel was transparent. And I just want to speak to the superintendent about this. We're volunteers here on the Board of Education. And I happen to be retired now, so I can spend a lot more time going through the presentations and on behalf of my board members. And I share my findings before the meetings. But it takes a lot of time to recognize the salary, recall that it doesn't reflect what I believe was approved in a contract, to go back and look for that contract, to ask the question. So what I'm asking for is a little more transparency in the budget to reflect actual versus state aid in these documents. Because we're talking about, and the line items, you probably get to it when you talk about how state aid is reflected. You also mentioned that building aid isn't broken out, it's one inclusive number. I'm gonna ask that we break out and delineate all the state aid that is given to us line by line, so we can get a true picture of how much we get reimbursed, and also in these particular lines where amounts are being showed, if it's reimbursable, that we state how much of this cost is reimbursable. Did I make myself understood?
Well, I could just add a little bit of color to that. This is a summary of the expenditure side of the house and where we started and each expenditure that's cut. The revenues are a different side of the budget development process. And for example, in your example about BOCES, we don't receive revenue in the same year that we expense those dollars. So to show them as in the same year when they don't happen in the same year is really not matching how the budget process works.
Then let's talk about that too, because I think it also reflects back to the mismatch that we're talking to. If we're getting money a year after we budget for it, let's know that. Let's know that up front. That's the transparency that I'm looking for at this point, because those are the questions that are being asked of me as a member of this Board of Education. Okay?
In regards to the salaries, I just wanted to add some clarity to that too. I think you're speaking about salaries and the net of state aid.
Mhm.
Salaries don't receive state aid and they don't receive any revenue reimbursement for them. I think you're talking about that we split salaries between budget codes, and that's really related to the fact that different people work in different functional areas. That includes teachers too. If a teacher works in the phys ed program, we charge let's say 0.4 their salaries in phys ed, we charge it there. And they may also be a classroom teacher in another certificated area, and we charge that there. But that's a routine thing that we do to accurately represent what functional area somebody's working in. But it's not represented as aidable or not aidable. That's not how we represent salaries.
There was one salary in particular that was referenced to, but we'll go back to that. I'll give you a call on that and then clarify it, and you can report on it at the next meeting. But to your point, and you raise a good point, that's where we need more transparency to understand this budget. Because if we don't understand the budget and how these numbers are developed and what's aidable and what's not, we're not going to be able to communicate it to the community who has to vote for this budget. And that's what I'm asking for help from administration to do. Okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, so this is the summary of the changes to the expenditures that we have done in the last 3 meetings. And here is our financial outlook slide we've been looking at each meeting for the last couple of meetings. This is based on the different tax levy scenarios that the board has asked to present since the beginning. Here we are at the 776, which was our maximum allowable tax levy increase. As we know, we spoke about it at our last meeting. We have closed this gap, and we have actually closed this gap, and there is no further gap for the 7.76% levy. Actually, we had exceeded that by $1.9 million at this point. And if we move forward to the 5% tax levy scenario, you actually see that we have actually closed that gap also. There's actually $106,000 excess there, and we have closed the 5% tax levy proposal at this point in time. Here's the 4% levy scenario. We still have a $537,000 gap here. And here is the 2.29% tax levy proposal, and that is a $1.6 million gap that we still would have to close that gap. And in the last meeting, one trustee asked, what would it take to close that $537,000 gap? What would that mean in the case of a levy? So up here in the left-hand box on this slide, this is actually what the levy would be if we closed that gap by levying for that money. Our levy would be $67.5 million, and the levy increase percentage would be 4.84%, and the annual increase to the average household would be $262. That's what that would look like if we closed that gap. But it's to be noted that we still have not seen the final state aid numbers. The one-house budget came out yesterday, actually. That's when the House and the Senate comment on Governor Hochul's executive budget and say what they agree with and offer alternative proposals. That one budget was announced yesterday, and they are in agreement with many of the things that Governor Hochul has proposed. Some of them are minor changes, but so we see a lot of agreement already brewing at the state level as to what's happening. So we're waiting for those final numbers. And here we are at the long-range financial outlook. Some board members asked for us to present it again, just to see where we are. As we spoke about in prior meetings, at the next meeting, we're terming it the rubber meets the road meeting. We're gonna see it more dynamic. Right here, it's very static. But if you remember from the last time we presented this a couple of meetings ago, the three versions were actually 7.76, 4, and 5. You don't see 7.76 here, because even at that meeting, we showed that 7.76 into the future is not a number that we would really need to consider. But now you'll see that these are changes that are reflected, these are standing still in time. This has to do with about $2 million in cuts in expenditures in our budget are reflected through here. And what you're seeing a little different is, at each of these scenarios, 2, 2, 9, 4, and 5, you're starting to see where there might be stress on our fund equity. And actually, the fund equity section is blown up here so you can see it. Next week, we'll see everything blown out so the board can see it in more, 2 weeks from now, in more detail. But what you start to see here is fund equity is made up of a couple of components. It's our reserves. Our reserves are for specific purposes, and our undesignated fund balance is not. And ultimately, when we're managing the budget long range, those are things we were going to have to consider as a board and community, is the balance between unrestricted fund balance and reserves. So at 2.29%, we make no other changes than the $2 million that we have currently reduced the budget by. We start to run into some fiscal stress starting in 2026. And you'll see 4% levy out into the future. We start to run into that problem in 2027. And we really don't seem to run out into a problem. We do see declining fund equity, reserves, and undesignated fund balance of 5%, but we do, after 10 years, when the bonds are completely paid off, we have gotten through 10 years without seeing some stress in our fund equity. And we're going to look at that in more detail in 2 weeks and see it more in action than just on a piece of paper. Mr. Trent, you had a question?
Yeah, I think with absorbing these three sections, I think it's important to note that each year it's the same levy. So
Correct.
the top is 2.29 every year, 4% every year, 5% every year, which is quite a bit, in my opinion, to be increasing by. But the bottom section, the 5%. At what year would you, look to stop budgeting to actuals and budget the way we used to? What year would that be?
Well, the term budgeting the way we used to, it's really budgeting to replenish our reserves, and I think we're in a state for the next foreseeable years where we're going to have to manage how our fund equity is helping to support our programs and our budget, because that's the position that we are in. It's a matter of managing it productively and managing it so we know where the stress points are and what happens. You're seeing this, and all you're seeing is the assumptions that are made for here. We're going to talk about them in more detail in 2 weeks. You are right, you're seeing the same levy out in time. That's not necessarily what may happen. And you're also seeing, you're not seeing changes to any other areas. So in those lines that say total revenues and total expenditures, you see it next week, those are actually blown out into the different areas that we have: administration, instructional, transportation, benefits, interfund transfers. Each of the areas are blown out in detail, and we're going to see that. It also includes no reductions in the future for anything. And the same program that we have as of today, which is as that we presented in our budget presentation, going out into the future. And that's not usually likely. We know from doing our budget, we add and we review and we add every year. We go through, but you have to make assumptions when you build a long-range plan. The same on the revenue side. Those items will blow out. We make assumptions as to how much state aid we might get into the future. Our assumption is 2% when we build this, because that's really what we've been getting, 2%. And we don't look like we're getting more based on the way the current construct of the law is, and that we are a hold harmless district. 2 years, one of the budget proposals that both the Senate and the House are behind Governor Hochul is an appropriation to look at the construct of the foundation aid formula and do a study on that, and to put a lot of money behind that. That could result in a couple of years of a complete turnaround in the foundation aid formula into the future. We don't know that now, so you still have to look at your long-range plan knowing what you know today, because you have to make those decisions. But at a point in time, if something changes legislatively, and we know how it would impact us, we make and we push that adjustment through, we show it, we talk about it at a board level, a community level, because that will affect us into the future.
So in the bottom, the 5% levy, where in that, like, how would you be able to tell when you will not need to rely on your reserves to fill the gaps of the budget?
If you see the line that says surplus and deficit, what moves your fund balance and your reserves every year is the change in your total revenues and your total expenditures. And I'm going to go over this in 2 weeks in detail. Basically, how you budget is disconnected from your actual operations at the end of the year. And what I mean by that is what really matters when you are impacting your fund balance and reserves is your actual revenues and your actual expenditures, what came in. Your budget is just a philosophical document. I think we're going to be here. But when you actually end your year, that's what changes your equity in your district. So those are, that's surplus and deficit. If you actually do the math in any one of those columns, you can take the first one. That surplus and deficit down below is basic math. It actually changes our equity. So in the very first one, if we have a 2.29% levy, I cannot read the first number, but I think it's 259,000, is that right? Is it 500 or 200?
The surplus
Yeah, the deficit.
is 259.
259. So down below, the $37 million in equity is literally a straight math problem. You reduce it by the $259,000 deficit that's anticipated that year, and that changes your total equity for that year. But your total equity is made up of multiple components. It's made up of your undesignated fund balance and your reserves, which that's a whole other area that we have to manage as a district, because in reserves and using reserves, you have to have a corresponding expenditure to spend them. So you start to see, like, for example, the orange box on top, the first year that we start to see some stress in 26, I'll just use it as an example. You actually see that the first number is 24 million and our ending equity is 12 million.
Can you point to that? You have a pointer on
Yes, I
your thing.
do, I'm sorry, let me figure out how to do that.
Good time.
Okay, here we are. So see in this first column right here, there's 24 million right here? And you see underneath it, it's $12 million right here.
Yep.
That's because we're anticipating, based on the assumptions we've made, a $12 million operational deficit that year. That means our revenues of $134 million will not keep pace with our actual expenditures of $146 million. And we will be operating at a deficit that year to the tune of $12 million. And how that works on here is that $12 million is a straight reduction out of the, hang on, I'm having trouble with this. 24 million minus 12 million is ending equity of $12 million, okay? But that $12 million, if you actually notice, that $12 million is $17 million is anticipated to still be locked up in reserves. So that means we have a negative undesignated fund balance of $5 million. Undesignated fund balance is what we know as the $4 million we contribute to our budget every year. So in this year, we would need $5.5 million, but we kind of couldn't get it out because it's all locked up in reserves for very specific purposes. In advance of this year, we would be on the phone with our legal counsel and we would be determining if there are any reserves that we could take money out of at the end of the year to try and release it. Some of them have very specific rules and very specific laws. And that's where we would start running into, stress here, because we would not be able to support the budget to the tune of $4 million that we do every year. We might be able to use more reserves in some areas than we may have in the years going forward. But this assumption for reserves in all the out years is that we continue to use 2.75 million of reserves from now and into the 10 years into the future. That could be an assumption that we change, but you have to make some assumptions when you build this. So that's when you start to see some of your stress because your fund equity is not just available to you all the time to use it to build into your budget.
So out of curiosity, if we were not able to use monies in the reserves for whatever reason, how would you make up that $5 million shortfall? What would your options be?
Well, for this budget year, we would not be able to contribute $4 million to our budget development process, which
Okay.
we'd be starting out the budget process with a reduction in revenue of $4 million. And actually, it would be more than $4 million, because based on this estimate, we'd be at $5.5 million. And that's where you start to see the stress. Now, obviously, we would start to say, maybe we use more than $2,750,000 of reserves, but for every reserve that you use, you have to have a corresponding expenditure on your books and records. So for example, we have about $5 million in the ERS reserve. We only have about $1 million in expenditures that we spend in a year in our ERS reserve. So we can't use $5 million if we wanted to in any single year. The most we could use is $1 million in any single year. So you can't grab all of that money at one time. So it's fund equity, while we talk about it holistically, we have about $30 million in fund equity, it does matter where it is. And that's how we start to talk about it, that's why it's important to look out, because you wouldn't want to be in 26 and just be finding this out. You'd really want to know this in 25. You'd want to start knowing what the projection, what it's looking like in the out years.
Question? This, I glaze over this slide every time you show it, because it's so much information. Is it possible to break this slide up into 2, maybe 3 slides? Because there is so much to comprehend. I'm just gonna throw that out to you, maybe
We're gonna
for
go
the
over
next
it,
time.
in 2 weeks, we are gonna go over it in more detail, because you're seeing it in a static format. You're
I mean,
seeing it-
people in the room can't even read what's up there. I can't see what's up there. I can barely see what's over here.
I think really what the intent was, it just as a static slide, is that you start to see, obviously you see, as the levy changes into the future, and the rate at which it changes determines how soon you start to see significant stress.
Well, and also, how we address,
Absolutely.
that stress. So to that point, we really need to fully comprehend the data that's on here.
You're gonna see it in live format, you're not gonna see it like this next time.
All right.
I'm
So as
gonna,
long
it's
as
gonna
we
literally up
understand
on the screen, and you're gonna see it not just like this, completely blown out.
it. Okay.
Can you make a key, Ms. Costa? With just the explaining what each line is, so we can kind of review that beforehand?
Yeah, if I could show it to you right now, which I can't because of the picture
Yeah.
on this slide, you would see what makes up total revenues when you see it next week. You're gonna see all the lines that make
So
that up.
is that how we're gonna be normally reviewing the projections, or we're gonna be reviewing it this way?
Well, I think this way you're seeing it just because you're in a period of time of trying to conceptualize long range, what long range means and how it moves, and it's just a way for you to see that decisions you make today will impact us into the future. But when you see it just as one document in a fluid way in 2 weeks, you can actually ask questions like, oh, what if we have a 3% levy next year and a 2% levy the year after? You can do that right here.
Okay.
And I could show you what the impact was on our fiscal situation before we made reductions of approximately $2 million in permanent expenditure reductions, which we've done through this budget process right here. These are permanent reductions that we've made into the future. So once you do that, we made that permanent reduction. But if you saw this long-range financial plan before that, the stress was even sooner than this, because we didn't make those reductions. So you'll see it in a fluid situation next time.
That much I understood.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rick, I'm sorry, you finished?
For now, yes.
Okay. With respect to revenues, we talked about it a little bit last meeting on how we do have to become more active to get our fair share. And these pilots and these IDA tax breaks that are being awarded without any input from our school district, we have to become more diligent about it. In the year that I left the board, between 2019 and 2020, we got a letter. It was distributed to all the board members from a Huntington Town council person alerting us to the problem. So we really have, when we talk about revenues, we really have to get our act together about advocating for our fair share. I stressed it last meeting, and I can't stress it enough now. If we got our fair share, and I think I mentioned this, in a letter to the editor that I read in Belport.com, a constituent said our streets should be lined with gold. And we really have to pay attention to that in moving forward, because then this financial outlook could have a much different picture.
Is that something that a board would usually like go on a retreat to learn about or to discuss?
On the IDA stuff and.
No, on advocating for more funding or, you know, issues that Ms. Felice has raised. Would it be appropriate for us to take a retreat to discuss that, to learn more?
I don't know if that's a retreat item, but there's nothing, I mean, the board could conduct its own work session to discuss that on their own, or have people come in, or, I mean, I don't know if it's a retreat item.
The only thing I've seen in the 6 districts I've worked in that have been different, I worked in one district that hired an actual advocacy firm that advocated for them up in Albany.
Okay.
And that's the only thing that was different than that one district than any others, and they had, you know, very specific needs, and they were the second lowest funded Foundation aid district in the state of New York. And they eventually, obviously, we now know with the full phase-in of Foundation aid, they are in a very different financial position than they have been in the years prior.
And I believe 2 presentations ago, you compared our tax structure to other districts. And it was noted in Port Jeff. Port Jeff has a much different, lower tax assessment than we do, because they get so much more from, I believe it's the LIPA facility in their district than we do in ours. Again.
But just to remind the board, there are 2 advocacy groups that we're tied in with. One is REFIT, and the other would be New York State School Boards Association, and they actually have lobbyists in Albany to deal with school funding issues. So I think, for me, it makes a lot of sense to be tied in closer with them, because they've got the resources,
And
as opposed to having a board in a relatively small district recreating a wheel that's already being worked on. So my hope had been that our legislative committee could be moving us forward to do that.
To Trustee Trent's point, perhaps that's also a wider range, and we consult with New York State School Board Association for a retreat specifically to those needs and those goals.
If we can learn how to advocate on a more local level,
Yeah.
I would definitely be interested in learning how to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's it. This is our normal slide about the remaining meetings. Next week, we meet in the workshop meeting, which we have affectionately termed the rubber meets the road meeting, followed by the budget hearing, the budget adoption on April 13th, and the budget hearing on May 4th, and then the vote and election on May 17th.
So I'm assuming March 30th is when administration will recommend a tax levy.
No, we are going to, what I'd like this evening is if we presented everything right now. So if there are changes that the board would like to see in what has been presented, that this is the time to tell administration. We will make those changes and we will bring it back to the board. And then through that document that Ms. Costa referred to, the board is going to determine where they want to land with regard to a levy. We believe we'll be able to make some additional reductions to get us down a little further. However, we're not at that point in doing that right just yet.
I just want to be sure that any of the staffing issues is not cutting into services to our students. And from what I think I heard,
It is not.
it's not. So to me, that's the most important thing, is to maintain the services for the students.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
Ms. Costa, I just have another question. Do we budget for potential bargaining increases?
Yes,
We budget for those.
yes.
All right. And I guess the appropriate time to talk about that would be in the executive session.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next item for discussion, which is the capital reserve fund. Earlier this school year, the board approved moving forward with projects totaling $4.8 million. Those projects were obviously put on hold with our state aid shortfall. I bring this back to the board this evening because the board may wish to consider moving forward with district-wide upgrade of our security systems and the high school projects, as these are both related to safety and security and simply must be done. We would need to fund the reserve an additional $266,000 to complete these projects, and if approved by the community, the reserve would create a new revenue stream in the form of state aid to the district. Obviously, the board knows that that money is currently sitting in a reserve, so it's not money that we need to raise taxes by, but simply get authorization from the community to spend that money.
Let me just clarify. With this recommendation, you're spending money that's already put in the capital reserve fund that can't be used for anything except capital expenses.
Capital expenses, correct.
So-
But I just want to add what I said initially. We need another $266,000.
Yeah, I was gonna get to, that one was not lost on me when I heard it. So let me address that question first. Is that 266,000 included in the expenditure?
No,
Or no, it would have to go back in, so any of these,
savings this year.
That's next year's budget.
Yeah. So
This
it's,
year.
the 266 would come from savings this school year. That's next year's school year.
oh, okay. All right, so it's not that this needs to be any bigger than it already is. Okay. So with regard to the capital expenses, there's some security issues that need to be addressed. And then there was also the issue of the turf field, which actually, when Ms. Johnson spoke about it, cleared that up for me, because initially when I heard about it, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. But thanks to Ms. Johnson, she explained exactly where that field is and what it's used for. It's not the football field, it's not the stadium, it's the field where you have your games, you have physical ed classes, and it's in need of repair, like right away, according to the information that's been provided to us. So if that work plus the security work is done, with another $266,000 over the next year, that could be accomplished, and that would create an income stream to get money back from state aid. How much would that be?
76.2 cents on the dollar. So it's approximately,
Over 15, right?
yeah, we anticipate it's 15-year period of probable use. So that would be about $120,000 a year. Maybe a little more than that, but that's the,
So if we get income back of about $120,000 a year, compared to the initial outlay of the extra 266, then in 3 years, we're even, but we've got income of $120,000 a year for the next 12 years?
12 after the 3, yes.
So that would depend upon what the state deems it as the projected life, right?
The lowest is 15 years, and
Oh, is it?
years,
Okay.
these would be 15 years.
I have a question. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, Dr. John, you're recommending that we ask in this budget vote the community to fund the capital reserve and then to spend the capital reserve on these particular projects, is that correct?
No, the board will move the money, the $266,000 into the reserve.
Okay.
And
Without
then
vote-
no, that's not voter approval.
Okay,
Then we would need to ask the community through, normally in the budget vote, whether they would allow us to spend that money for that purpose.
and that's a separate referendum than the overall budget?
That's a separate referendum, and that's why we skipped down to here before we went up to the legal notices in item C3, I think now.
So in terms of money that the taxpayers are going to have to contribute for next year, doing this capital reserve and spending it on the security and turf field will not increase the tax burden on the taxpayer,
Correct.
correct?
The money's already saved.
Money
There's
is-
no money.
Because the money's
It's already
there.
saved.
So it's really just getting authorization to spend money that's there and to spend it on these projects that we're told are essential to be done right now. And you're nodding your head,
Yeah.
yes? Okay.
I think, so I'm trying to understand the reimbursement aspect. If we spend money this year, does that affect our levy for next year? Or the percent of what our levy could be, or?
It would be building aid revenue, it would be building aid that would come in the future. And generally speaking, it doesn't start until 18 months, the building aid, after the contracts are signed with the vendors to do the work. So you're talking about the public saying yes, the bids being drawn up and you going out in the street for the work, for the companies. You signing contracts with those companies. At the point the contracts go up to SED with the project plans, usually it's 18 months after that that the building aid starts to come in. So you're not looking at building aid coming in for about 2 years.
Okay, so when you use this capital reserve, you look at it as revenue
In the future, it will be revenue.
in the future? What, in the future meaning like next year or the year?
About 24 months, about 2 years before we'll start seeing building aid come in.
Okay, and that would be the only thing that would be affected by using this as revenue?
At the point, right after it's spent, the only thing that would be coming in would be revenue. There's no further cost, there's no debt on
But
this,
it's-
they're not bonds, they're none of that.
But it's just revenue from the state, not revenue from taxpayers?
Revenue from the state.
Okay.
And the capital reserve has an 8-year life. I don't know which year we're in, right? So
It was 16, so 24 is the end of 8 years.
it has to be spent by 24 or liquidated.
Ms. Felice?
Thank you. The windows for Vern Kritz were left out of the proposal.
Yeah, we pulled it out because we thought it would be difficult at coming to the community. Clearly, if the board, and then I preface this by, this is here for your consideration. Initially, with the shortfall, found it difficult that we needed to go to the community for such a large increase to have this confuse the situation. However, now that we're down in the 4s, the board might want to consider
What was
bringing
the
this.
cost of the, I don't recall the total cost.
Yeah, I have it. Windows were another 2.2 million.
And we're not actually voting on this resolution tonight, this is just what we're to
Well, here's
consider?
the problem. We don't need to vote on it tonight, but we need to put it in the paper by the deadline. And what's the deadline?
Gets published on March 30th and March 31st, South Shore Press, Long Island Advance.
So when does it have to be?
So it would have to be in early next week.
So that's the problem.
So it's either tonight or do a special
Do a special
meeting
meeting to do it.
by the beginning of next week.
I just think that's a lot to ask since we have 2 board members missing tonight. I just wanted to throw that out for consideration. Absolutely worthy of discussion and a decision needs to be made. But anyway, I just have a few more questions about the resolution. So with the projected savings for the 2021-2022 school year, we don't know what that is yet.
Right.
The projected savings, okay. I would like to see as much of that money put back into funding, fund balance for the next school year. I think we were looking at $4 million as an original
Well,
figure.
No, it's more than, yeah.
And also reserves, whatever the traffic will bear, to go into the reserves a little bit more to bring the, to meet the needs of the 23 budget, the 22-23 budget. We have to use a little bit more. 4 is not gonna cut it. Anything over 4 is not gonna cut it.
We're working on something similar to what you're talking about.
Okay.
And we're just not prepared to make any presentations to the board, so hopefully that will be something that you're actually looking at. And what we're looking at would reduce it even further.
Okay. And then we can make changes that night too, but then again, you still have, I don't,
You see,
just hear me out a minute. So you have to go to print by March 30th, did you say?
It has to be published starting March 30th. It has to go to the papers Monday or Tuesday, really the latest.
I hate to say this because we have a big agenda these next 2 weeks. We need another meeting.
I agree.
We need
Because I
another
haven't
meeting.
even read the recommended action.
There's no way we can make this decision tonight. And you want us to send our recommendations to you via email and not discuss them here in public for the budget? No, I'm asking, that was a question.
I didn't hear that.
I don't.
You said you said that the budget, you need to know what to put forward for the presentation, so you need to know from us.
I was hoping this evening that you could provide any suggestions that you want for the budget. So the board as a whole could give administration direction.
I don't want to see any raises for administration.
Okay,
That's
but
one. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, but I'm looking at from the board, right? So not from individual trustees. I want the board to achieve a consensus on what they
Okay,
want.
so I'm putting out that to my board members. I don't want to see any raises for administration this year. None.
Is there a consensus on the board?
That's where I'm going to
That-
start.
And these are administrators who are not contractual.
Correct. Non-contractual.
Non-contractual administrators.
Correct.
Do we know how many
Well,
of those are?
Pardon me?
Do we know how many of those are?
What non-contractual?
Well, I think, are you talking about my assistants?
I'm not
Contractual
sure I
would be
understand.
all-
Are
everybody-
they in a collective bargaining unit?
They're not.
Then them, yeah, then too, yes,
So you're saying anybody who's not a member of the union?
of a bargaining
Okay.
unit.
I wasn't following your definition.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. When will we get the final state aid numbers?
Hopefully by April 1st is when the
So we have to make these decisions before we get the final state aid numbers. But that's always been the way.
that's always been that way.
Does it help to look at this capital reserve issue by going back before we got the news about the building aid issue? Where there was a proposal being discussed about work to be done, and you just mentioned also the Vern Kritz windows, and that's not part of this now. So the use of the capital reserve would be solely for security and the turf field, and that's it?
Handrails. That's
Handrails,
also
some
safety.
safety issues. And I think there was consensus along those lines before.
Well, we still have to fund it, we have to fund it more though.
That's the 266,
So we
right?
have to find 266 to put into the reserve to spend these monies on
Mhm.
what we're gonna ask the voters to do.
Well, let's ask
No,
it
no,
again,
the
is that
board-
in here?
The board would make that transfer into the reserve.
Yeah.
You have to ask the voters to
To
expend
spend
the
it.
money, yeah.
So we would transfer $266,000
Mhm.
from one reserve fund to another, or where
No.
would it come from?
From the surpluses that we're seeing in the
Just, may I
budget.
just make a comment? Could you speak at the podium for the benefit of the
Yeah.
viewers on our live stream?
There would be
so
a
they can hear you.
transfer that the board would see from this year's budget, you'd see from a line item that's going to have you know, we have areas in the budget this year that we are seeing favorable variances that would come from one of those areas, and it would be a transfer to capital reserve fund, and it would just be a budget transfer that the board would approve, and that money would go into the capital reserve. And that would happen presumably after the public voted yes to spend the money. Then we would do the transfer after the May 17th vote, probably at the next meeting in June, and we would transfer $266,000.
But if we don't do this at all, so that we don't do the security work, we don't do the handrails, we don't do the turf field repairs, then the 266,000, would that reduce, or would it reduce the so-called gap between revenues and expenditures that we have?
One of our contributing to our surplus at the end of this year, that we will be funding our fund balance and reserves at the end of this year. And putting as much money, any surplus that we have will be contributing, we will have a surplus this year.
Yes, thank you, that's the word I was looking for.
Dr.
fund
Kennedy,
balance.
at our last board meeting, this was presented to us. Was it not?
What was presented?
This, what we're discussing now?
No, it was presented a few meetings ago.
Okay.
The capital reserve.
Now, you had asked us to, we had asked you to delay this so that we had time to think about it. Now, were there any changes made in this during that time period?
Yeah, the windows were removed from burn prints.
So that was the only thing that was removed from
Correct.
what you're saying? And do you guys remember what we had said at that time? Because we said we'd like to take this out, postpone it, so that it could be updated. I looked at this thing and I thought that most of the things that we had asked for then had been corrected. And I'm just not sure what's missing now, that we need more time to think about. So
As I recall, to Dr. Gianni's point before, the proposal was presented to us early on.
Right.
And, but that was prior to learning of the mismatch.
Yeah.
And after the mismatch, it was considered that maybe we hold off on it. But no, we'd have to wait a whole nother year. We couldn't present this at a later date, or could we?
No, you could, and at the time, I think I recommended that you may want to do an October vote.
Right.
Because the field needs to be done. You're going to get 1 year out of it, that's it. And if you don't do an October vote, it's not getting done by the time it's over. So, a new vote is money to the district.
The
You
vote's
can do-
about what,
you-
$20,000?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's probably 15 to 20,000. But as we've went through this process, and it's clear that we're not at that 7.76%, I thought the board might want to consider doing it when you're doing the regular vote, because it might very well assist you in passing the budget.
But to Trustee Parker's point, again, there's still reason to pause, because, the 2% cap and the calculation that goes into it doesn't translate into a true 2%. It translates much higher. And that's what the community sees. And the community saw 7.76, which is off the table at this point. We're certain that's off the table, correct?
Yes.
7.76 is off the table. That's good. We're still over 4%, not so good. And 4% plus even asking to utilize capital reserve funds that are already in the $30 million in reserves that we have. It would cost the taxpayers no more money. However, if we could use a portion of the reserves from the capital, I don't think we can, actually. Capital reserves can only be used for capital.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, of the other reserves that we have, and we could use a portion of it, we need to use as much as we can to lower that tax
So
levy.
they too only can be used for the designated purpose, the other reserves.
But we're already designated
No,
that
we're
we were
not
using some.
replenishing.
Say that again?
We're not replenishing. Can you speak to it better than I?
I think I understand what this is saying. We can use reserves that we have only up to expenditure that's anticipated in the budget for that year. So it doesn't matter how much we have socked away, let's say it's $5 million for ERS. If the expenditure is only $1 million, we can only use up to $1 million.
Okay.
I think we're pledging in the ERS category
It's about $500,000.
about $500,000.
Yeah.
So yes, you could always go up to more,
Mhm.
but only up to what you're anticipated to spend.
Okay, understood.
And if you spend less than that, even though you use that amount to build your budget, for example, if you pledge $1 million and you only end up spending $800,000, and you did use $1 million in your revenues as a revenue source, you don't get to use that $1 million. Like, you can only use $800,000
Right.
when the time comes. That's just how it works.
Understood. And so, to this point, I'm not certain that putting this forward now, and I understand the need. I don't want to minimize the need for the repairs that are being asked here. I'm just not sure it's something that the community can swallow at this point. And I'm conflicted on that. And I'm more conflicted because we're in such a time crunch to make this decision because of how we have to publish. And another advocacy, more advocacy work that we need to do, which isn't going to help us now, is to be able to know what our state reimbursement is going to be before we have to make these decisions. That's for the future.
I get the optics are difficult, and that's why I'm just suggesting to the board to consider it, because there are benefits from it as well.
It's a worthy
And-
consideration. I'm not
and-
minimizing
And
that.
it's, at least for you, it sounds like you may be more willing to wait till October.
If it means passing or failing, I think the $20,000 investment and waiting till October to see where we land.
And I would agree, if it means passing or failing, you should wait till October.
That's where I defer to the rest of my trustees.
Ms. Scott, so we're able to use the capital reserve for monies other than capital projects with just approval from the voters, correct?
No.
Capital, you mean other than capital projects, what do you mean by that? It's only for improvements to our buildings and our facilities.
So we can't use that money with the approval of the voters to use it to fill our gap, per se?
No.
No.
And I just may want to add too, to my colleagues. In October, perhaps we can add back in the windows at Burn Fritz,
Perhaps.
which are very much needed.
I would just caution the board that it needs to be done in October, otherwise the kids will not be playing on the field.
Okay. We get that.
Liquidation, okay.
And how
Yeah,
much,
so I just want to clarify in response to the question that was just asked. There is an option to have the capital reserve liquidated. So you put up a proposition to liquidate that fund. So instead of, you'd make a determination that it's no longer necessary for its intended purpose, you would liquidate that fund and use those funds in the first instance to pay down bonded indebtedness. And if there's any that beyond that would go to reduce the tax levy. So,
can I just follow up on that train of thought? If the capital reserve fund were liquidated, then it takes away the money to spend for the capital expenditure that needs to be done pretty much right away. And we give up the creation of an income stream of about $120,000 a year for 12 years, I think, if I did the arithmetic right.
15.
So it actually would end up costing us money and hurting programs because this particular field would be out of commission for the kids to use. Is that,
That's accurate, unless you budgeted to replace it.
unless you put money into it?
But we do have $2.3 million plus in a reserve that we could use to help fill the gap with approval of the voters. I think that referendum would be easier to swallow than, hey, we have to put more money in this reserve to spend for other expenses in the district. I think, looking at the two, the one to pay down to fill the gap would be much more favorable to the taxpayers. in
But
my
I
opinion.
think it's much less fiscally responsible to do that because we're giving up the income stream. We're having a deteriorated field that probably is going to be out of commission.
But you could still do those projects next year though, and then create that income stream of $100,000+ a year
But the field will be unusable,
for that year.
yes.
And if we liquidated the capital reserve fund, wouldn't we have to create one? So wouldn't we need another
Voter approval.
voter approval to create a new one?
Yes, you would.
So that's another complication. I'm just going back. I remember when the whole discussion came up, and this would have been back in the fall, and it was the security issues that needed to be addressed, the turf field, the windows, and then there was still some money available in the reserve fund, I believe, so there was a discussion about a press box, and then took out the press box and just, pared it all back to the absolutely essential expenses, or the ones that we really seem to need to do. And that could be done out of the capital reserve fund. But now, what I'm hearing is that could be done, but we have to transfer some of any savings that have been achieved this year to the tune of $266,000, transfer that into the fund as well.
That's what it would
Did I
be.
miss anything there?
No, the balance in the fund to do the estimated costs of the projects described, we would need $266,000 in that reserve. Additional than what's already there.
Ms. Costa, we don't have to, can you just look at this for me? This is the presentation you gave us a couple meetings back.
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure this is still accurate, because I haven't read this, about this year. You're recommending this and this?
Yeah.
These two? Okay. So my question is, the camera system is $553,000. If we take that out of the recommended, action here, we don't need to fund the fund balance anymore. Is that correct?
Say that one more time.
If we don't do the camera system,
Yeah, you're right, you're accurate, but
We need to do the
we
camera
need,
system.
we need the camera system.
okay. I
Basically,
get that we need it. I'm just looking at the, does the voters think we need it, right? Will they support that action? Because we have a gap, but we wanna take money, I guess, from that area we have the gap in and put it in this capital reserve to pay for expenses that are needed, but when we could use that to help close the gap.
You know me well enough to know that I quibble about vocabulary words.
Yeah.
And I'm having trouble with the definition of gap there. Because the difference between what we need to operate the business for the next year and what we could get from a tax levy, there's not a gap because of the way that the tax cap is calculated this year. What we have is a situation, though, where a lot of the response was because of seeing the way the tax cap is calculated to be the 7.76%. So we know that's not going to happen. We don't need the money. That would be completely irresponsible fiscally to try to do that. So what we have now is a budget that is well under the tax cap, but the increase appears larger than what people expected because of the sense that tax cap means 2% when it really doesn't. So I'm bothered by targeting our decisions about what is necessary to run the schools, to provide services for the kids and maintain all the activities and services we have now, to say there's not money to do that. And so I just know, I know this district, and I know that there are people who have been upset and outraged to hear the number 7.76, which isn't a real number. We're not doing that. But they've always been supportive of the school district. So I'm not convinced that they wouldn't be supportive. I know, I've heard comments made from people in the audience saying people will vote against the budget. Well, if they do, I'm afraid it's because of a misunderstanding on the part of the public. And somehow we need to do a better job of explaining what it is. And if we look at our expenses this year and compare them to the expenses next year that's projected, what was that, like a 2% less in terms of expenses? So the budget's actually been cut 2% since last year. And I think that's something to celebrate right there.
Well, clearly, I see that there's no support for the decision tonight. I think, my recommendation would be either to move a meeting into next week, but quite honestly, we're not going to have any more information, so that may be kind of foolhardy to do. My suggestion would just move it to October.
How much more will it cost us to have to do a special election in October?
I'm guesstimating at 15 to 20,000. I don't know yet.
So say 20,000, I'll just round it off, versus the 266. That's adding another 20,000 on top of what we would be putting in to get these projects funded.
That's where I'm at. I'm not holding it till October, and then in October, we'll get a better picture of how we did this cycle, how our budget passed, and then we can add back in the project of the windows if that's something that the traffic will bear. We have to reduce that tax levy. You're still talking about the average homeowner increase of nearly $300 in additional school taxes.
Is that over the assumed amount of 2%? Or
Yes, that's at the,
the difference,
well-
difference between 2.29%?
it's the one that was just projected with the tax levy at 4.84%.
And that,
On the slide
number 27. slide
27, yes.
But even the 4.84% levy, that's how we get to just like an even keel. We have, which is no deficit. So, you know, anything less than that, we have a deficit, we have a gap. And I think 4.8% is high. It's very high.
It is high.
You know, on top of people having their mindset of no on the budget, on top of misinformation in the community, on top of, you know, how we have already spent money as a district. I think we really need to be mindful about what we put forward to the voters. And I think when you say that we want to, you know, move $260,000+ into a capital reserve to spend it on items that may be necessary, that's still a lot to swallow and a lot to understand. So I you know.
You know, one of the
That's my
reasons that I've been paying particular attention to the treasurer's report is because 10,000 here, 10,000 there, 20,000 here adds up. And we have to be mindful of what we're spending, because we're not really talking about where we could be saving money. And I'm going to give a quick example. I'm a member of the Patchogue Lions Club. Our mission is eyesight. We go to preschools, we go to school districts to do a pre-screening of sight with a machine that costs about $7,000. And just before the pandemic, my president reached out to our district to be able to offer that services free of charge. And everything got shut down, people weren't being let in, it was understood. And when I inquired about it later, as we were starting to come out of the pandemic, because our club wanted to be able to offer these services again, I learned that our district not only bought one of those machines, they bought two. And the board never knew anything about it. Now, you got it much cheaper, because I'm assuming you got it on a state contract, but it still cost the district $10,000 for a service that community organizations provide for free. And those are the expenses that we really haven't talked about. All we're talking about here is revenues and then the overall expenses. We're not looking in line by line by line of what we're spending and where we could save that money. Our nurses were overwhelmed with COVID compliance. They could, and I was told it was them who were doing the pre-screenings. They could have been relieved of that duty because it's provided by a community service organization whose mission is to give back. And so we need to pay more attention to the treasurer's report, and we need to look into more of those line items and what's being spent. There are positions in that budget right now that we did not fill, and yet they're still there. So there's going to be significant savings from this year. And we need to know what those savings are going to be, and then I agree, all with Trustee Trent. All the money that's going to be saved needs to be put back into, and we won't use the word gap, because I understand what the president was speaking about, to lower this tax levy under 4%. That's where you have to start. We have it projected on slide 27, what you're going to use from the reserves. And we have to go into those reserves just a little bit more to bring down that tax levy, because tax levy nearing 5% is not going to be palatable to this community. And that's what we need to see next week. And I further think we need to hold off on this resolution until October. And sad as that may be, and I don't want to deprive the students of that much used field, but we have no choice. We're in a crisis here. We're in a crisis, and we really have no
I'm
choice.
not hearing any consensus, and we're down 2 board members tonight. So I don't think this is going to go forward, but there's still the option to bring it back in October.
Correct.
I believe that's what I said. but
Yeah,
okay.
I know,
Okay.
I'm just saying it in my way, because sometimes I need to do that.
Okay.
And I would just like direction from the board on the no raise comment for administrators not in the union. Is that something the board?
We could talk about that.
And I need to know if you want me to pull that out for the board. I mean, we only have 4 members here this evening, but I'm asked for any changes that you want for the projected
Oh,
budget.
so you're asking about what's in the staffing amount, the
No,
expenditure, on the
Yeah,
expenditure side,
it would be on
Which
the
is a-
expenditure side, yeah.
which was,
You're not gonna find a line item for it.
okay.
I just, like I said, it's a.
I don't know if we want to allow our student representative to go home. I think she has school tomorrow and it's getting a little late, or if she wants to stay. It's up to you. I just don't want,
Yeah.
I would.
If that's okay with you.
Yeah, do you have anything else you want to tell us before you go?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Have a good night.
Okay.
So we're talking about, just problems we have with the proposed budget here?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, administration needs some guidance if you want me to change something for the next presentation.
So I would like those 5 security positions to stay in place until I see some kind of assessment done that says, you know, it's okay to decrease those numbers, our staff by 5.
So, I mean, I know we only have 4 people, but I'd like consensus at least before.
That's adding to the budget.
I know, but I think that it's necessary, because we have one social worker who makes 120 something. So if we can keep 5 security guards for $150,000, I think that's definitely money well spent.
But what we're being told by administration
Mhm.
is that we've operated this year without 5 security slots.
No,
So if that's the case, I would yield to what administration is saying. They're saying it works now.
that's
So-
fine. I disagree, and I would like an assessment done. That's my opinion. If my colleagues disagree, then that's
Well,
fine with me.
But we'll do the assessment. I just
Okay.
need to know what I'm doing for the budget.
I can't support adding those positions back. I can't support adding those positions back into the budget at this time under these circumstances. I do support the assessment, however.
Yeah, I would do that.
yeah.
And
It would be interesting on that assessment if, maybe we can get some data about the effectiveness of our different, like, restorative practices and RTI and all of that to see, because it seems like that's part of why the buildings are operating as they are right now, so.
Well, we did start off the year talking about social, emotional well-being, and to the president's comments, perhaps it is working.
Yeah. And consensus on the raises.
How much money are we talking
I have
about?
no
Do you
idea.
know what's in the
Nope.
budget for
I
that?
have no idea, and I don't really, if I even knew, I would want to say it.
But, okay, I'm sorry. Can we do executive session after we finish everything?
Sure.
And then just have a brief discussion about that?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. And any other items?
Dip back into the reserves more. Bring more money out of the reserves as much as the traffic can bear.
Consensus?
I would want to see projections.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's what we're
That
gonna, that's what we're
one's
gonna
tough
be
to
doing.
evaluate
That's what we're gonna do
because
on,
Taking
30th.
more out this year, I can't tell just from looking at that what it would mean for following years. So,
So we can do that on the 30th?
yeah, how about that on the 30th?
Sure.
I would like to know how much in the proposed budget we have for bargaining increases.
Exec session.
Exec session. I would like to see what those numbers look like.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that this evening.
Oh, we're having an executive session.
I think the president just asked for it going to
Yeah, we're adding that on after we close.
I might need another cup of coffee.
Anything else?
I think that's all the reservations I heard, so.
Okay, so then I'd like to move back to C3. And I believe option 1 is just the vote. We need to amend the one piece for the location since the board
Of the public hearing.
decided the public hearing is going to be at the middle school. So I would offer option 2, which just is the budget vote and election. and amend it to read the location to be Belleville Middle School. So we had prepared two options for the board in the event they wanted to add the.
Let me just open the one that you're suggesting now would be option 2.
No, option 1.
Oh, option
okay.
1.
Yes.
Hold on.
Hold on just a second, please.
And again, we just need to amend the location to Belleville Middle School.
Is that already written, or you need
No,
to
no,
make that
it's
amendment?
written
Okay,
as here,
that's why I'm not
so
seeing
I
it.
just,
To make it
Okay.
middle school?
yeah, we'll make the amendment after the board.
So so then our resolution would to approve the notice as amended to change the location from district administration office to the middle school auditorium. Is that, that's it?
That'll work.
So, is there a motion to approve the notice of public hearing as amended with regard to the location? Ms. Felice, second, Mr. Parker, all in favor, it's unanimous.
Okay, and the next item for discussion is the school calendar for 22-23. The proposed calendar has students coming in for the first day after Labor Day weekend on Tuesday the 6th. Staff first days are August 31st and September 1st. Unfortunately, we could not include the day before Thanksgiving this year without taking a day from a later vacation period. And with no built-in snow days, it's not something that administration would recommend to do anyway. The calendar does follow the Eastern Suffolk BOCES calendar, as most of our neighboring school districts do. So I offer this for the board's consideration and approval.
I have a question on that. Did you get input from our bargaining unit?
Yes, bargaining units, presidents of each association, yes, I did.
And the feedback that you got, that?
Draft option 2, option 1, what's being proposed?
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to approve the calendar as presented? A motion to approve the calendar? Ms. Felice?
I'll
Second, Mr. Trent. All in favor? It's unanimously approved.
Okay, and the final item for discussion is a review of Board Policy Series 1000 and 5000, and I'm going to turn that over to the Board President for discussion.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry it's so late, so bear with me. Over the last 6 weeks to 2 months, it's been like a real jolt to us in terms of dealing with the budget presentation and the stresses that we have this year, taking into account everything. When we started out, we had a lot of questions about how did this we've been calling it a mismatch, but how did this happen? Why did it happen? And what can we do about it so it doesn't happen again? And in the meantime, I know that the business office has made some changes on the business end with regard to doing RFPs for our advisors, like our bond counsel, fiscal advisors, external auditors, internal auditors, so that the contracts that we have with them in the future will require that they report the status of all of our debt and spending. Is that a correct summation of what's going on in the business office?
Yes, we're in the process of adjusting those, yeah.
Okay. And then, since I'm on the board and not an administrator, I was looking at what does the board need to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. And since we operate by setting policies, I looked at the 1,000 and 5,000 line and saw, first of all, they're rather aged, so it's a good opportunity to look at them anyway. But I wanted to have the review done so that we can embed in our policy the notices that would be given to us by our outside advisors. So it becomes part of the policy. What has been interesting to me in looking at this, and I think I'd mentioned to you about, I've been doing some reading about bond basics for school districts. It looks like the standard in the field is to have the board do a resolution authorizing the president of the board as chief financial officer to make changes to the borrowing timing and but without putting any limitations on that. In other words, even though there was an advertisement to the public that the capital project would be over a there would be building aid over a 15-year period that would cover the cost of the money that was borrowed. That's what was advertised to the public. But when the time came to actually sell the bonds, it was made a 20-year amortization. And so I'm looking at the policy and saying, if we could have a policy in place that doesn't delegate this extreme responsibility to one person, then I think we will be better off going forward, because that way a board would know exactly what was going on. And that's kind of it in a nutshell about why I wanted to get this on the agenda tonight, so that we can start to get these policies reviewed, taking into account all the things we've learned now over the last 2 years. So I don't really have a plan in place except to say that I think it's more of a project than just doing, 1 or 2 policies the way we've been doing it through strategic planning. And I would wonder if the administration has got any idea about how to go about doing such a large-scale review.
Yeah, I would suggest some type of a subcommittee consisting of at least 3 trustees to review those policies one by one.
And, okay, and a subcommittee of the board to review them, and then have it go to strategic planning,
Yes,
so
yes,
you've got
yes.
stakeholder input.
Sure, because those policies really directly affect the board in the 1,000s and the business office in the 5,000s.
And it would be, I think it would be coordinated, because we need input from the business office about,
Oh, sure.
what can actually go in, and maybe, and obviously council weighs in on these new policies. And, clearly bond counsel could weigh in too, because the standard language that is used, if we're gonna make changes in what's been used in the past, I would want to be sure that it was protecting the district and still providing some flexibility, because from what I understand, when you borrow the money, when you sell the bonds, there may be a little lag before you start getting state aid in for some, like half a year, or maybe even as much as a year.
It'd be like 18 months.
18 months. And I could tell from the reading that boards can do borrowing resolutions to do what are called bands, bond anticipation notes. So there may need to be a little adjustment before getting the actual borrowing in place. But what I want to avoid is having that major change in the terms of borrowing. The difference between what was told to the taxpayer of a 15-year period of borrowing and receipt of 15 years of building aid to then become a 20-year period of borrowing. The taxpayers didn't vote on those capital projects knowing that. What they were told is it was going to be 15 years. And we talk a lot at this table about transparency. That's not just no transparency, that's not what they were told. And there's been nothing that I've seen to show a change of circumstances after that advertisement to the public went out saying 15 years. I don't see a change of circumstances to then make it go to 20 years. I don't want us to do that, and I don't want a board in the future to do that. So that's why I want to have the policies reviewed and put into place, and that's, so the suggestion would be a subcommittee, and I would like to be part of that to get this done. We've got 2 other members who aren't here tonight, so I think that in terms of actually staffing it, let's wait till they come back and see who wants to participate with that.
Okay, I could put something in the board update tomorrow to request volunteers.
I just would like to thank the president for the work that she has done into reviewing the policies. You have made this budget process, the superintendent search, and making changes in moving forward your sole mission. And I know how much time that has taken. So I just want to thank you for the work that you're putting in. We are all going to benefit from that work that you have put in. To the point that you raise about the policies, when we take our oath of office, we swear to uphold those policies. And if I could just ask counsel, I think those policies total over 600 pages right now, approximately. You're gonna look at his trusty little computer.
Yeah, it's
It's
trying to go,
about
it's a
that.
lot.
It's about that.
It keeps going.
And we take that oath of office not knowing what those policies are. And so, to your point, I wholeheartedly support your initiative. I think we also have to do something more to educate Board of Trustees at the beginning of each year on what those policies are, and we really have to take time to go through them to understand.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so, my concern about having this information provided to the taxpayers in connection with getting the borrowing approved about the 15-year period and then changing it. By changing the amortization schedule on it, if I'm remembering the number correctly from last time, I think you said it ended up costing the district another $8 million. So, when the taxpayers were told about the capital borrowing availability, they weren't anticipating that extra $8 million. And I don't think that's fair. It's just not right. And I'm looking forward to having us get our policies in order, working with the business office so that the business office can help us know what needs to be in the policies and in terms of how the business office is operating. And I think also part of it would be having periodic information given to us, you know, whether it'll be a brief presentation about some of the issues that have come before us. And get that as part of the calendar when we're doing the agendas over the next year. So, anyway, I think we have a consensus that we should move forward on that and start talking about who's gonna be part of this effort, so that the subcommittee can make a recommendation to the board and get it done. So, got consensus, I think, all four? Okay.
Okay, moving on to curriculum items. Administration recommends approval of curriculum items reflected in schedules G1 through G3.
Can we take the next 3 consent agendas together, please? I don't see anything outstanding that would require additional dialogue, and it would help us move this meeting along. So that would
Okay,
be
so administration will
HI.
recommend consent agenda items reflected in curriculum section G, personnel section 8, and business section I.
So, is there a motion to approve all items in section G, H, and I? Ms. Felice, and a second, Mr. Parker. All in favor? It's unanimous.
No public commentary.
No, but I do have one little question. The donation from the Brookhaven Cluster of Suffolk County Superintendents Association,
Yes,
do they do that every year?
yes, they do.
Do they give it to us every year?
They give it to me, and I give it back to the district.
Well, I look forward to hearing how you're gonna decide that this
Oh,
money
it's
is.
already been given to the high school.
End of the year
Lieutenant Scott, do you
activities.
remember it?
End of the year activities.
Yeah, it's going towards end of the year activities for the students.
Okay. Well, good, thanks for letting us know. We can end on a high note, knowing that. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one item more for consideration with respect to the budget workshop, the budget hearing, I'm sorry. It's going to be on May 4th. We were remiss in approving a district mailing that was requested by a number of residents for the February 14th budget letter that went out. Not every home was aware until they either had advantages of reading through social media or on the or in the local newspapers, actually, and in Newsday as well. But I would like us to do a version of that mailer, but to publicize to every household the date and time and location of the budget hearing.
So is your motion to add that to the agenda?
To add approving the mailing for such to the agenda, yes.
Is there a motion to add to the agenda a resolution to approve doing a mailing?
Well, I'll make that motion.
Okay, is there a second? Okay. Questions or discussion? I'm gonna probe just a little bit. I think that when we first got the news about we're calling it mismatch, I felt we were making best efforts to clarify that, but in looking back, since not everybody is on social media or had electronic access to the information that we posted on the website or even in some of the newspapers, if I had to do it again, I would have made a suggestion, I think, to handle it a little differently. But we're past that. We're like over a month since we're calling it a letter, but nobody got a hard copy of anything. You know, the letter was posted online on the website. So I'm almost thinking, in fact, I do think, if we can put our effort into preparing a wonderful mailer that really highlights what the district has been doing, you know, in terms of providing services for the kids, but also what changes have been made by the district in terms of how we're operating. You know, both the business office with regard to the proposed, you know, the RFPs for our outside, the external auditor, bond counsel, etc., as well as the efforts we're going to be making for board policies. I think to send out notice right now about that is just, could be just more confusion.
So, if I could add to that, I guess I'll just repeat what I said before. I feel that messaging and communications is how we build trust and understanding. So my opinion of it is the more we communicate to the public in every avenue we have to communicate with the public, the better off we will be with the public understanding our budget, understanding what we're doing, and then ultimately supporting our efforts on the budget goal.
I can't disagree with that. I'm just kind of looking at like the timeline now and the fact that, excuse me, we're going to have at the Miramar Beach Civic Association, that would be the first live presentation that the superintendent and the assistant superintendent present the budget information. And there will be others, as well as the budget hearing that we talked about the notice tonight, about it being at the middle school. So I'm not sure, I mean, I do agree about the importance of sharing the facts as we know them, and the facts as we know them now are certainly different from what we thought back at the beginning. And I think there needs to be reassurance, like it was clearly stated tonight, there's no money missing here. You know, things were done 12 and 15 years ago that have created problems that have landed on our desk, and we're dealing with it. So, in terms of the most effective way to do it, I'd like input from the other board members, because I'm, like I said before, I'm repeating myself, I'm not sure that an additional mailing of a hard copy of anything right now is going to clarify it, but once we have the budget presentation and the budget mailer going out, we can add to it something in writing that indicates what happened, you know, from 12 and 15 years ago, and how are we dealing with it. And you know, in terms of why, I don't know that we'll ever know that. How it happened, it's, I think, because of the standard bonding resolutions, and that's something that we'll be addressing in our policy revision.
I think we should go through with the motion. I certainly think it's a good idea. And I know people are asking questions daily, so the more information we can feed them, the better, I think. Let's go forward with it.
So, is this something you can draft and
Well,
you
exactly,
like-
I don't know what the
What-
board is thinking about. I mean, the situation is very fluid, we're working on things as, as we come back tomorrow. Come the 30th, whatever we do say will be old news. So what would the board prefer to say? We provided the board with talking points earlier in the week. Is that what you're thinking of?
I think we could say, hey, that 7.76% levy that you may have heard about is not happening. We could say there's no money missing. We could start off with those 2 points, which I think would go a very, very long way.
I think the community is waiting to hear that.
Absolutely, and I think that we need to say something. We need to send something directly to the voter, because Newsday is going to the voter, Advance is going to the voter, and they're not getting our message. They're getting a message that is not accurate.
Well, the Advance was accurate on the district side.
Yeah, but they started off.
I know, but you
Yeah.
can't censor them from,
And so in
From what
in a
they
lot of
printed
cases, that's
there.
all people read was the beginning. So,
Well, I'd be happy to take suggestions from the board on what you would like included in the mailer, and we'll work with.
okay,
syntax
I think
and
to
maybe put something together.
dispel any fears, no money's missing. We have plans in place for how that mismatch won't happen again basically without notice to all board members. And I think in the policy, it ought to go beyond that it's like if something's advertised to the public, the board and the district need to stick with that unless they say there's a change of circumstances and they have to go back and get approval again. I don't think it was right for this to have happened. And I can see from the standard bonding resolutions that were used that that's what happened. It changed because the bonding resolution delegated authority to the president of the board as chief fiscal officer to make whatever changes in connection with the
I
bond.
think we can work out those details. We just need to, I would just ask in the interest of time, that we either support or don't support sending out a mailing. We'll work out the details of what the mailing.
All right,
will
you've
contain.
made a motion. It was seconded. We've had discussions and questions. And we'll do it, so we'll call the vote. All in favor? Okay. And in addition to what'll be prepared, it's gonna go to our usual sources, like on the website, Facebook page, and the notice through the Blackboard system, as well as hard copies in the mail to households.
To every household in the district. That's my understanding of the motion?
That's households.
All district households.
Okay, all
That's
district
households.
Okay, that's my understanding as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, now, do we have, I don't think anybody has any more remarks.
I actually do. Dr. Gianni, I know I asked for this before, and it was in the update once, but the classroom removals, can we continually have that in the discipline reports?
Okay, I don't remember how that's, I think it's a separate report.
Yeah, it was in our update one time,
Yeah.
but not the ones afterwards.
Sure.
And at some point, I would like to review the student eligibility policy.
That's on
You
the
mean for
website.
athletics or
Yeah.
I
extracurricular?
mean, do you want to individually review it?
No,
It's
like,
on the-
I would like to send it to the respective committee for review and then to be updated, because I do have some comments on that. And that's it.
So that's kind of in the category, isn't it, of policy type things? Or,
Yeah, I'm not
Sure,
sure
it's,
what
it's,
code
it's,
it's in.
it's, I think it's an addendum to the code. But we'll send it back to the secondary schools for input.
So-
That's who it's really effective on.
And does it go to committee, any committee?
Yeah, well, we'll get the input from administration.
Okay, first,
Yeah.
then it goes to.
Then it would go. Well, the board approves the code annually, so those changes would probably would come through at that time.
But at what point does it go through committee?
Any recommendations would go through the committee prior to that,
Okay,
but the board would see it generally at the annual meeting.
okay.
okay.
Eligibility.
Motion to adjourn?
No,
Miss-
we're motion to go into executive
Oh,
session.
that's right. Is there a motion to move into executive session to discuss issue of salaries? Mr. Trent, second by Ms.
I'm not making that motion. I'm not seconding it either. I'll vote for it, but I'm not seconding it.
So,
Okay.
just so for executive session, if it's salaries, it has to include not only the dollar amount, but also issues of the employee's history. And so
I
it's,
can't give you that.
Is
So-
that, well,
so for the number is a public number, right? So the actual number, the salary number that employees make, that's a public discussion. If you're tying the salary with whether or not that specific employee deserves that salary or deserves a raise or all those issues, and you're gonna go into that employee's employment history, that is a executive session discussion. I just wanna be clear in terms of
Yeah.
How about negotiations?
negotiations are clearly.
I want to know those numbers as well.
Because these numbers reflect negotiation.
Okay,
yeah, so we can do it
yes,
because negotiations are permitted in executive session.
yes.
And it's the concept
Yes,
of
they were
raises
negotiated, yes.
as opposed to a particular person or a particular amount.
Correct.
Okay. So, I have the motion by Mr. Trent, a second by anybody? I'll second for purposes of any questions or discussion there. Want to go in, okay, a motion then to go into executive session? All in favor? I've got 3. And are there any noes?
No.
Wait, it's a no or a yes?
It's a yes.
Okay, so 4 yeses, so it's unanimous.